Congressman. I'm looking forward to that 100th birthday party. Our next speaker is an Irish lawyer from County Cork named Michael Kingston. And if you've been working around the PAIM working group, you may know Michael. I'm just going to say very quickly, in 2004, we had an unfortunate accident here called the Selindang Ayu in the Aleutians. 6 crew members died when the helicopter rescuing them was swamped by a wave, and they weren't able to be, and so we lost the helicopter and lost 6 crew members and had a spill. And Alaskans got together at that time in an auditorium like this, called by Rick Steiner, former University of Alaska Fairbanks Sea Grant professor, to say, how can we get the insurance industry and the shipping industry and the environmental community and the business community to work together to have safe shipping. And you've heard what we've done in the Arctic, but we can do just so much with rules. We also have to bring resources to the table. And Michael has seen this and has been a world leader and has an announcement to make today about what is happening in the work plan for PAIM that is going to help bring more attention and more resources to shipping safety in the Arctic. Michael Kingston.
Thank you very much, Mead, and good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to sincerely thank Niels Anderson and the Institute of the North for your kind invitation here to speak. And it's a great honour, hailing from County Cork in Ireland, to be amongst such world leaders here in Alaska this week. And I'd just like to say I don't know what Congressman Young is drinking up there in that cold place, but he certainly didn't look 84 years of age to me, and I think he'll have no problem reaching the 100 mark if he continues in that vein. That I should be here speaking is testament to the collective work of a lot of people in a cross-jurisdictional and collaborative effort, which was just highlighted by Congressman Young, that we should be very proud of. And I'm here to tell you about positive developments, really a world development amongst nations, not just the Arctic Council states, but all the observer states, permanent participants, and very importantly, industry and the research community, and not forgetting the International Maritime Organization, which represents the 171 world states, the IMO's Polar Code, and separately the Arctic Council's Arctic Shipping Best Practices Information Forum, to help with its implementation, are by any standards world achievements, achievements that the Arctic states, because of their input, can be extremely proud of. And I say that as an independent Irishman, one that as a lawyer and as the voluntary representative of the International Union of Marine Insurance at the IMO on the finalization of the Polar Code, and in working with the Arctic Council on the Arctic Shipping Best Practices Information Forum, I am in a position to bear witness to that. And I'm not going to go into any of the technical detail. Today's not a day for that, but I will briefly summarize what has been achieved and then explain the process, focusing on the institutions, states and organizations involved and individuals, and finish with the principles that underline the progress, because that, I believe, is the most important message for this forum today and indeed the summit tomorrow, to understand that there is hope and light at the end of the tunnel for every initiative, that if we go about it in the right way and have determination and have the will to succeed and faith in ourselves as human beings and those around us, we can achieve our objectives. And indeed, it's a lesson for other issues in the world. The IMO's Polar Code came into force in January of this year by way of an amendment to 3 existing conventions, the cornerstone conventions of the IMO. Rather than being a standalone convention, the environmental aspects of the Polar Code come into force under MARPOL, the Maritime Pollution Convention, the crew certification aspects under STCW, the Crew Training and Watchkeeping Convention, and the safety aspects under SOLAS, the Safety of Life at Sea Convention. And I'm not going to go into the details, but suffice to say that in the polar regions, there are significant extra requirements in relation to environmental matters, such as discharge prohibitions in relation to sewage, garbage, and oily and noxious substances, in relation to extra crew training requirements and in relation to ship limitation, functional equipment and safety equipment. And the most important aspect for us to understand, encapsulating all of these, is that it is now necessary for operators to hold a polar waters operation manual that explains that they have a plan to deal with a worst-case scenario in the conditions that may be encountered. They must demonstrate search and rescue capability, including a total loss of the vessel, that equipment and crew are fit for purpose in the difficult conditions, and they must refer to an ice regime methodology that shows how their ship will deal with the ice in the area that is being contemplated, and that methodology must be explained in their polar ship certificate, which will be issued by the flag state where their ship is registered. In the development of this methodology, I have been representing the International Union of Marine Insurance. And we all, of course, remember the Crystal Serenity's voyage last August. So by way of an example, she would now need to include her plans in her Polar Waters Operation Manual, which would then have to be approved by her flag state before she could get a polar ship certificate. Of course, even if those requirements are met, the insurers would need to be satisfied, and so would the jurisdiction where she is travelling, port state control, in her case last August, the United States and Canada. To put the achievement of the Polar Code in context and the fact that it has been brought in by way of amendments to existing conventions, it's important to understand that often standalone conventions are agreed by the sensible delegations at the IMO and the Secretariat, but then not ratified by enough national governments to become binding internationally. In other words, industry lobbyists through politicians get in the way, resulting in a failure to enact very sensible procedures for the safety of our seafarers and the protection of our environment. For example, the Convention for Pollution from Fixed Structures is still lying on government shelves since 1977. And in the meantime, we have endured significant incidents. The Deepwater Horizon disaster spilled 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. No international convention applied, and unfortunately, national regulation was not sufficient. The conclusion of the US National Commission was clear, stating that fundamental changes were required. It said this disaster was almost the inevitable result of years of industry and government complacency and lack of attention to detail. And of course, the disaster killed 11 people and spilled so much oil into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's important to remember that this was a human tragedy, and we remember those who lost their life in the incident. Very often, in the sensationalization and then the passage of time, the human aspect of such incidents gets lost and forgotten, and each of these men's families still grieve today as I speak here. Additionally, the Torre-Molinos Convention for Fishing Boat Safety has been lying on government shelves since 1977, whilst fishing tragedy after fishing tragedy have occurred in every fishing jurisdiction in the world, including here in the Arctic and in Alaska. This tragedy in the Bering Sea a few years ago being just one horrendous example in the Arctic. The Fishing Convention, shamefully, has only been ratified by 4 countries: Norway, Iceland, the Netherlands and South Africa. And I would urge Congressman Young, I hope for the safety of the seafarers of Alaska, to raise this in Washington, D.C. and take a stand on that issue if he can. So when we put this in context, the early implementation of the Polar Code by amending the 3 cornerstone conventions of the IMO is a marvelous achievement. And I don't have time to go into the detail today, but the amount of work carried out by the individuals of the state delegations working with industry to make the Polar Code fit for purpose should not be underestimated. This involved a lot of voluntary time by the state delegates and industry, and the Arctic states should be enormously proud of their delegations. And as we are here in the United States, I will mention Captain John Morger of the United States Coast Guard, Arctic lead, his colleague, Lieutenant Andrew Gibbons, and Jeff Lance and Admiral Paul Thomas, the delegation leads of the United States at the IMO. Of course, when regulations are made and become law, they need to be understood and enforced. When I had the huge honour of doing the keynote speech at the Institute of the North Conference here in Fairbanks in September 2015, I asked who knew the details about the Polar Code, the terms of which had been agreed at that stage. 5 people out of 300 put up their hand. That was the scale of the task that we faced. However, working in the insurance industry and with ice captains of the Arctic and others, we made a proposal to the Arctic Council that a forum for best practice be established for education about the Polar Code and to help with implementation. And the proposal came to the attention of the diligent individuals of the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, and at the suggestion of the IMO and PAIM at their joint Ship Art Conference at the World Maritime University in Malmö, Sweden, in August 2015, I made the proposal in a seminar chaired by Jeff Lance of the United States Coast Guard. Shortly thereafter, I attended the Institute of the North Conference here in Alaska, and I explained that I had just been asked to officially table the proposal at PAIM's meeting in Stockholm in January 2016. And cutting a very long story short, and a huge effort by the Arctic states and industry, the forum has been included in the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group's 2017 to 2019 work plan to help implement the Polar Code correctly. And much progress has been made, and the forum's terms of reference were agreed at PAIM's Copenhagen meeting on the 2nd of February this year. It is a groundbreaking collaboration by governments, industry, the research community and international regulatory bodies to help with the implementation of international regulation and is a template for other areas. And the forum will help focus on the inputs that will determine the worst-case scenario that may occur that is to be explained in the Polar Waters Operation Manual. This requires important data, hydrographic data, meteorology, crew training, communication, ice charting, and so on. And the participants that will be members are representatives from those listed here from all the significant industry bodies, as well as the 8 Arctic states delegations, observer member state delegations, and permanent participants, including the indigenous community, of course, and the environmental NGOs. And invitations have been issued, and most of these participants have confirmed they want to be members. The forum will automatically and very importantly update a website portal hosted by PAIM, and the best standards as they evolve will be disseminated to all concerned so everyone will know where to get the best information and so on a continual basis. Each participant will be responsible for gathering the latest developments in their area of expertise on a cross-jurisdictional basis and for updating the forum. We need to know what the best information is at any point in time, and currently that knowledge is lacking in the various decision-making stages of the process. The operators preparing their Polar Waters Operation Manual, the flag states then looking at it, the insurance industry, financiers approving projects, and port state control. Put simply, people do not know where to get reliable information, and they now will. And the first meeting is in London, in the United Kingdom, on the 5th and 6th of June, to coincide with the Maritime Safety Committee of the International Maritime Organization. It will be hosted, importantly, by industry, by Lloyd's of London and Lloyd's Register. It's important to note that any organization with information about best practices should send that to the PAIM Secretariat, and what an opportunity to highlight issues of concern. And I heard the indigenous community yesterday, and indeed today, talk about knowledge that they have and would like to communicate, such as whaling guidelines for shipping. And also here in Alaska, the great work of the Marine Exchange of Alaska with various guidelines and best practices. The median is now there, and it should be used to communicate all that information to the shipping world. We must always work together to achieve best practice in international regulation for the protection of the environment and our seafarers. When this proposal was being tabled in September 2015, in my talk here in Alaska, I said that I did not come here to have, as we would say back in Ireland, a nice fireside chat about what might or might not be a good idea. I came here to say, here is a realistic and defined achievable, so let's go out and achieve it during the United States Arctic Council chairmanship, whose stated focus was navigational safety. I said, let's leave here tomorrow by looking in the mirror and saying to ourselves, I am going to do my best to achieve this. Well, it has been achieved and will be official tomorrow, and is a great achievement, in my opinion, under the United States chairmanship. But it is an achievement that all the Arctic states can be proud of, and permanent participants and observer states, collaborating with industry and the research community with the full support and acknowledgement of the International Maritime Organization. And as I explained here in September 2015, the key to achieving things is simple, and it was referred to earlier by Lieutenant Governor Mallet. It's about having faith in humanity, to find the good people in industry, in international regulatory bodies, governments, the research community. They just have to be found by never judging people too soon. And this significant development is an achievement for the belief in and kindness of human nature. And yes, there are hard times when not everything goes according to plan, where you think you have found goodness, but it turns out to be false, and where self-interest overrides humanity. But despite that, we must always have the strength to continue to have faith in those around us. And when I arrived here in Fairbanks a few days ago, as a wandering Irishman, I was trying to find something to do whilst adjusting from the jet lag. And I know what you're thinking as an Irishman, but it was a bit too early in the day for that. Although not greatly religious, I stumbled across the church of the Immaculate Conception where Mass was just starting. In I went to say a few prayers for some family members and a friend who had some challenges. And my own country, Ireland's stamp, was everywhere. First, the church was built by the Irish miners, and one of the hymns was sung to the Irish melody of the great Irish travelling monk, St. Columba. And I received a massive welcome from the priest and the congregation into this community, and such kindness was pretty incredible. What struck me most about that Mass was that 2 babies were being baptized in this community, in this sacred Arctic place, together in harmony. One young Brodie of Indigenous heritage, one, although local, of non-Indigenous heritage, young Easton. The work that we do in our organisations and administrations is greater than the present. It's about the future, Brodie and Easton's future. That is a huge responsibility, and we must discharge that duty. And I believe that the work that the Arctic Council have done in establishing such a responsible Arctic Shipping Best Practices Information Forum is a huge step in the right direction. And let us remember, some are great, some are not, but nations are not made up of their leaders. They are made up of their people, wonderful people, at all levels in administrations and organisations, in the research community, in the Indigenous communities, in academic institutions, in our youth who have been involved in this process. I've come across so many of them, either working at the IMO, in the Arctic Council state delegations, or in the Arctic Council, from all Arctic states without exception, from observing states and permanent participants, and from the Indigenous community. And I've seen them work for free, voluntarily, long into the candlelight hours, on Saturdays and Sundays, because they believed in something. And why? Because they care about people, about the Arctic's environment and its people, and about our seafarers, and they care about those who have paid the price and suffered the consequences, and they want to learn from the lessons of history so that young Brodie and Easton have a future. So, as a neutral Irishman, while I have the chance, I would just like to say, you, my friends of the Arctic states, and the people in the delegations, some of whom are in this room, make the world a better place. And we must always follow the courage of our convictions, and always together we will make a difference. So well done, the Arctic Council and the IMO, for achieving the Polar Code and establishing the Arctic Shipping Best Practices Information Forum. You are indeed true and honourable friends of the sea and those that work there. And now let's make it work. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kingston, and may this new forum at PAIM go well and prosper, and show the world an example of Arctic mariners getting together with the constituencies they would affect to make sure we have safety.